Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we'll be diving into the deep world of evangelical effeminacy, and who better to do that with than David French and Russell Moore. This is a twofer. This is a dynamic duo of how to suck at politics. Or in this case, I think David French and Russell Moore both function as they're intentional about it. They're not just bad; they're intentional about being bad and subverting the church, subverting our culture. These guys are intentional about it, so we're just going to listen to them have a disagreement and discuss what David French-ism is. And this is going to be a long one, I think. And we'll see how long I can make it. I hear this is a very good hate watch. I have not listened to this whatsoever. So this is going to be a fun time, hopefully. Because I've not been. I'm on a losing streak as far as watching long things goes. Like, I just watched Finding Dory, and that was perhaps the second worst Pixar movie I've ever seen in my life. So coming off of that, we're gonna watch this, and hopefully it'll be a fun time. Hopefully it'll at least be fun to hate watch, and that's what we're going to do today. And if you like the Evangelical Dark Web, don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel. And if you really like the Evangelical Dark Web, check out evangelicaldarkweb.org. Articles every day on that site, almost every day. And if you can support us there because there's a Patreon-like system, and you can become a member. So without further ado, let's roll tape.
French. One of you said, I particularly want you to talk about David French-ism. So we will do that today. And I'm joined by David French at the Dispatch, author of Divided We Fall, important book on the sorts of craziness that we have going on around us and how to fix it. And so I just kind of wanted folks to listen in on some of what we would talk about at coffee or at lunch or something like that without a lot of censorship, maybe a little. We won't talk about everything we talk about there, but most of the time. And so this person's asking about David French-ism. I know what that is.
Yeah.
But do you know what that is? What is it?
Well, one thing I can say, being an ism isn't all it's cracked up to be. But I would say that the short version of David French-ism is the defense of the classical liberal order of the American founding through respect, arguments mounted in respect and decency. That's the aspiration of David French-ism, and that's actually the attack on David French-ism, which is an attack on the classical liberal founding and an attack on the notion that in our present time, that kindness or decency are even acceptable characteristics to demonstrate in public life.
Why has that happened? I mean, you and I both experience this all the time, and there's this sense of sometimes I think that some of the big controversies are not about the content of what's being debated, but whether somebody seems angry enough at the right people.
Yeah. It's funny, especially on the right. There's what I would call a temperamental political correctness, which is you can't be opposed to. It's not enough to be opposed to something. You have to be opposed to it with the right volume and the right level of intensity and the right level of anger and animosity. And I think really the central story of our time politically, which is extending culturally, is one of animosity.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of, A, that's just Twitter. B, there's just all kinds of social science that tells us that Republicans tend to be Republicans, not so much because they love Republican ideas, but because they hate or fear Democrats, and vice versa. And this is something called negative partisanship or negative polarization.
I don't really know where you get that from, but again, sociology, not exactly a solid field there. But the idea that people don't believe affirmatively in good things like conservatism, small government, family values, that kind of stuff, like that's kind of incorrect. But I understand, the Republican Party is that bad. It's never really been a representative of these values, and it's to some degree, we've actually improved the Republican Party by driving out people like David French. And it actually is more emblematic of good things than it used to be during the days of, National Review having a prominent voice.
And it is the enemy of respect, kindness, decency, Because if you're that angry, if you're that furious, and if you've convinced yourself the stakes are that high, to use the words of the original Against David French-ism essay, then kindness or decency become quote unquote second order values.
Yeah, or an indication that you're not willing to fight.
Yes.
This is a surrender from fighting.
Yes.
And so this might be one of the few times where we've had a conversation where I've not made a drag queen story hour joke.
Well, we made it 5 minutes.
We made it 5 minutes. I didn't do it. But that's one of the examples that was brought forward is if you're not saying that everything bad ought to be illegal in every case. I mean, that's complex because it's dealing with a public institution. So
right.
forth.
No, it's not complex.
But if you're not saying
no, drag queen story hour is already illegal. You know, it's already a crime to do lewd acts in front of a minor. There is a distinction between lewd and nudes. And drag queen story hour is inherently lewd. It's in front of minors. It's already illegal. Those people are sex offenders. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's already against the law. It just needs to be enforced that way. And if you hear about the things that go on at these events, the twerking, the wardrobe malfunctions where someone's balls are exposed, like these things happen. Those are illegal. Those are sex offenders. And they should be registered as such. And those parents should be registered as such for abusing their kids. Like if you're taking your kid to drag queen story hour, you can't be trusted with children. And I don't want you around my children. I don't want you living 500 feet within a school or whatever that requirement is. I don't want you working with children in your daily life. That's the type of punishment you should have as a parent for that type of thing. It's not complicated. It's biblical.
Everything bad ought to be illegal, then that means a refusal to fight.
Right.
And then it simply goes from, do you think this is good or bad, to, well, why won't you stop it?
Yes, exactly. And
none of these people are actually stopping any of this
no,
stuff.
they're not stopping it. They're tweeting aggressively about it.
Yes,
So,
yes.
But yeah, I'm an old line civil.
Sorry about that. I do not expect phone calls at 2:30 in the morning, but I had to take that. And then I had to squeeze the lemon afterwards. Man, very good news. Very good news indeed. Life is going great for people around me. So let's get back to this. I kind of forget where my place is, but I'm sure we'll dive right back into this effeminacy.
And
none of these people are actually stopping any of this
no,
stuff.
they're not stopping it. They're tweeting aggressively about it.
Yes,
So,
yes.
But yeah, I'm an old line civil libertarian in that I have spent my entire legal career while I was litigating, defending First Amendment rights. And I defended people I profoundly disagreed with. I defended the religious liberty of people I profoundly disagreed with, due process rights of people that I disagreed with. I believe that America's civil liberties apply to all of us equally. And so does that mean that there are times when I'm going to defend something that I think the content of the speech is reprehensible? Yes, I'm going to do that because all of us are equally entitled to enjoy the liberties protected in the Bill of Rights. And
Drag
so,
queen story hour
at
is
this
not
time,
free
it's
speech.
very hard for that commitment to civil liberties to survive this level of animosity because if you say, I really loathe this other person or I really loathe this idea, then your mind starts working towards how can I creatively work to where I can preserve my free speech and I can deprive you of yours.
Yeah, that's the issue, is this sort of this inconsistency that I face this a lot with mosques.
Right.
So obviously, I think that
because that's the only thing that's the only religious liberty the ERLC ever defended was the ability to build mosque on certain sites. And that was the only religious liberty that the ERLC was interested in defending. They didn't defend the Southern Baptist religious liberty.
what Islam teaches is not true.
Right.
But to say that mosques ought not to be outlawed or zoned out of existence, I could understand it. I would disagree, but I could understand it if someone said, we need to have a king with power over religion, establishing a church, and that's what we have. But instead, what you end up with are people who are saying, we need absolute religious liberty, and we need to outlaw all of these religions that we don't like.
No one's really
Right.
saying that.
Yeah, this has been a big issue. And in fact, you see in some quarters of the far right, you'll see people try to argue that the First Amendment and the Free Exercise Clause was really designed for Judeo-Christian liberty and not for anyone else's, which, one of the things you do when you're interpreting a law is you look at the text first. That's not there. I'm very sorry. That is just not there. And so if you're going to be a defender of religious liberty, and if you want to actually protect it, if you want religious liberty to be actually protected, you need to defend everyone's religious freedom. Because once you break that firewall that says the government is going to be able to infringe upon some religions and not others, once you breach that firewall, you better pray you win all your elections.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting to me is I would have people who would say often, why are we talking about, and this was even just talking about religious liberty for Christians.
Right.
Why are we talking about this? That's defensive. Why don't we move on the offense? And I was starting to realize, wait a minute, what that actually betrays is you think what really matters is what happens with the state.
Right.
And not what is happening with the church.
Right.
Where religious liberty, what I'm saying is leave us alone so that the real power can come through. And the real power is the preached word of God and the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
That's a false dichotomy. That's not what going on offense betrays. The idea of going on offense is being like, hey, let's get rid of these restrictions on church speech. Let's get rid of that because that's unconstitutional. That would be going on offense. That's one instance, a small instance of going on offense. How about another one? The government has no power, or health boards have no power over the church. How about that one? That's going on offense. There's 1,000 ways to go on offense that don't actually say that the gospel doesn't matter and the state matters more than the church. Again, this is about going on offense is moving the ball forward rather than just holding back in advance. That's not the purpose of this. We do need to counterattack. We do need to counter the culture and not just take it and play defense. This is such stupid logic by Russell Moore, but then again, he sucks at his job, has always sucked at his job, but he's always been masterful at, undermining institutions.
Yes, 100% correct. When I was a religious liberty attorney, I had all kinds of ministries that were clients. And for many of them, I had a little speech that I would give. And the speech would be something that goes a lot like this, that look, during this fight, we're going to be focused a ton on freedom. But carrying with freedom is responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, I can, by God's grace, secure your liberty. But it's your responsibility to then use that liberty for the glory of the kingdom of God. I mean, and for God's glory, that is the responsibility that comes along with liberty. And I think that what we often do in this country is we so focus on the liberty, we don't focus on what the liberty grants us the ability to do. And that's what we should be doubling down on. That's evangelizing, that's showing the love of Jesus. But we just keep thinking about religious liberty. But even going back to the founding notion of this country, liberty, the handmaiden of liberty is responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's just pause right there and check yourself before you wreck yourself, because you're riggedy wrecking yourself, David French, because what do? All you do is attack the church. Now that there's no more Trump in the White House, you used to write weekly Sunday columns attacking Trump, and now you spend your weekly Sunday columns attacking the church. So chickadee check yourself and you wreck yourself, because you use your religious liberty, you use your liberty to attack the church, to attack Christians. That's not glorifying God.
Yeah, and one of the problems, I think, and I think you and I both have experienced this, is it's very difficult in this sort of environment to say, here are some challenges to religious liberty, mm-hmm. but here are ways that we're not standing on the edge of the apocalypse necessarily. It's much easier to go forward and say your religious liberty is imperiled. So when I would talk about
it's really
the
not.
Stewardship of protecting religious liberty,
it's just less
I would
clickbaity.
go in and say, here's what I'm talking about and here's what I'm not talking about. Because if I just left it there, I would have people coming up and assuming we're about to be put into camps, and there's all sorts of things that not only isn't true.
Yeah. Australia is building
ends up with a
concentration
lack
camps
of
as we speak.
gratitude to God for the freedoms we do have, and a diminishing of, say, our brothers and sisters in China and Cuba and other places.
Well, the main way in which people learn about religious liberty, especially Christians in this country, is through a fundraising/threat matrix.
Yeah.
So
What?
you're learning through about religious liberty through lawsuits, through litigation, through people flooding your emails saying religious liberty is under attack, under attack, under attack. And they're not making up these, these cases. They're not making them up. They're occurring. But the way I've put it is, the citadel of religious liberty is very strong, and the cannon fire against it is real. But the walls are still very strong. I'll just give you an example. In the last 10 years, there has been an unbroken record of success in cases on the merits of the Supreme Court for religious liberty. Unbroken record. And most of them, it's not been...
Not true. Not true. Our Supreme Court ruled against churches until Amy Coney Barrett was appointed to the Supreme Court. Then they decided to change their mind on the merits of religious liberty when it actually mattered, when it was actually a contended issue, when governments were legitimately persecuting. And let's look at Jack Phillips. Again, the Masterpiece Cake Shop. They didn't really rule in favor of religious liberty. They ruled in favor of him on that specific instance, but they didn't actually rule in favor of religious liberty. They just kicked the can down the road on the larger issue. So, no, he is wrong. He is lying. He's a lawyer, so he should know these things. He should know that the case precedent of religious liberty has been weak on these past issues. Even I think the strongest precedent set was about some statues that were over 100 years old. So those over 100 years old are historical statues, so that they're protected. But anything newer than that, not so much protected. Like, the Supreme Court has been very weak on this issue. Actually, he's wrong. He's lying. He's a lawyer. He should know better.
5-4. It's not been the close. It's been 9-0. It's been 7-2, most of them. And so right now, honestly, truthfully, people of all religions in the United States of America exercise and enjoy more religious liberty protections in a concrete way than they have since the founding of this country.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't filing lawsuits or states aren't taking action that you have to defend against. You absolutely do. But we can't
that wasn't
look
true
at
in
the
2020.
cannon fire only and forget the fact that we have very strong walls to resist it.
Yeah, and as Christians, we ought to be the people who understand that better than anyone. It's Augustine's city of God. You have collapse and awakening happening all at the same time, and it's just very difficult for people to see that. Now, if David French-ism in the caricature is a refusal to fight, then that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because one of the things you do that I will often say to you, why are you doing?
Let me redefine David French-ism, because I don't think it's a refusal to fight. That's not really the caricature of it. It's more like, let me provide a conservative case for something that's abhorrent and antithetical to conservatism. That's David French-ism. The conservative case for drag queen story hour, the conservative case for voting Democrat, the conservative case for vaccination mandates. That's David French-ism. Not the refusal to fight, let me write a conservative case for your adversary's position.
This is you will do these debates with people who are very critical, and I would not do that without a court order, just because who wants to give up a night to do that? Why do you do that, or why did you do that? Are you going to keep doing it?
Yeah, I've done it a number of times, and I'll do it again. A couple of reasons. One, the first big debate I did was over David French-ism. So I figured, I need to sally forth to defend myself. And that was at Catholic University against Sohrab Ahmari. And that got intense.
Yeah,
that got intense.
I remember.
And then right after that, I was invited to debate Eric Metaxas twice.
Yeah.
Once at Q Conference and then once at John Brown University. And I just said, Sure. Let me say I did not expect those debates to be as intense as they got. Now, the interesting thing is the first one at the Q conference, I was very, I was pretty calm. I was very calm throughout the whole thing. And then, because I don't like to get angry in these things. The second one, so this was September of 2020, and I was getting increasingly alarmed at the idea that Christians were going to once again carry Donald Trump over the finish line. I was pretty animated. And I remember getting off the stage and called my wife. I said, I feel like I just went too far. And then after January 6th, I thought, I did not go far enough. Yeah. And then the last one was I debated Chris Rufo on Barry Weiss's podcast. Barry Weiss is a friend. I've known her for a long time. Defended actually her free speech at Columbia back when she was a Columbia student in the early 2000s. And we debated the CRT, the anti-CRT legislation, which I think has a lot of free speech problems attached to it. So yeah, I'll do it on occasion.
No, it doesn't, because government schools are not, we as a people get to decide what's put in a government school. That's not a free speech issue. Personally, time to get rid of those. But if you look at the damage that public schools have done to our culture at large, why do we have Black History Month? It's because public schools removed black people from U.S. history. So so then there was a counter push to put that back in, or to make that a separate history. But why was it removed in the first place? Because public schools, Woodrow Wilson, all that stuff from 100 years ago. Interesting. Democrat policies, actually.
And I get pinged every now and then with, why don't you debate me? Or why don't if it's strategic and it's a valuable, and I can reach an audience that might have an open mind, I'll do it. But I'm just not sitting here, looking like, I'm not like a prize fighter looking for the next, match. And unless it was pay-per-view and I got some cut, then maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
He's not a prize fighter. He's a trophy to slay.
Looking around in 2015, 2016, 2017, and saying what is happening to evangelicalism. Some of that was not a surprise. I mean, Jerry Falwell Jr., like him, hate him, whatever, in between, it's kind of consistently Jerry Falwell Jr. And has been for years. Eric
The pool boy
Metaxas,
rumors were rumor for years.
That was a surprise to me.
Yes.
Because I would love sitting down and having dinner with Eric Metaxas, because for years and years and years, watching him do Socrates in the City, he's brilliant, he's funny as can be, and he had an intellectual credibility that often was lacking in sort of populist.
I believe he went to Princeton, or Harvard, one of those two. But I don't know Eric Metaxas all that well, but the fact that he was hanging out with Russell Moore is kind of a red flag, because Russell Moore was never a good guy. He was never a good guy. David French, he wrote for the National Review, which, in my opinion, was always a crap magazine. Always a crap magazine. William F. Buckley, I don't care about who he was or his legacy. The way he talked about the JFK conspiracy and how he, just completely railed against conspiracy theorists, when the government's official position is now that there was a conspiracy. But, he was peddling that government nonsense back then. And then, fun fact about the National Review, they were like the one magazine or the one movie critics that hated on Beverly Hills Cop, which is one of the all-time great 80s comedies. It's such a bad magazine. And let's not forget, Mitt Romney's the next Ronald Reagan. They published that in 2007, 2008. These people are trash. Or it's a trash magazine. It has a trash legacy. Not every writer is trash, but the magazine itself is trash.
Evangelicalism. And so
David French is trash.
It's surprising to me now, not the support of a candidate or not, but children's books about Donald Trump and
Caveman Donald drains the swamp.
And so forth. And so maybe I just don't understand what the trajectory is, but we see it a lot.
People write children's books for money.
Why? Well, are you and I just crazy?
Well, there's
could
always
be.
that possibility.
That possibility is there.
So I think with Eric, and after debating him twice and talking to him in the green rooms and everything, I think there was a couple of things going on that were actually going on in a lot of Christians that the media just doesn't get. One is which was the catastrophism. The America's over. America, this is an emergency. America's going to end. I mean, I remember at the John Brown event, Eric said something to the effect that if Joe Biden wins, we won't be able to hold these events. Like that the FBI was going to shut down a debate at a Christian college. I mean, it didn't make any sense to me. But
Well, it should make sense to you, because if you look at what Merrick Garland's doing and how he wants to label parents who show up at these school board meetings as domestic terrorists, it should make plenty of sense that we are on that road. That's the road we're on, and that's the road he wanted us on, because he's an enemy. Russell Moore's an enemy too. Like, it's not hard to see the slippery slope, and we are far down the slippery slope. 2020 was a ramp on the slippery slope to take us even further down the slippery slope, and that's where we're at.
But it was really this sense of existential threat combined with, and this is the thing that the media misses, prophecy. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I've written a lot about, and that's something that, because the mainstream media has trouble covering evangelicalism in general.
Right.
It has real trouble covering charismatic Pentecostal Christianity.
Yes.
Just doesn't get it, isn't in contact with it.
Or when they are, they assume that that's representative of all of the rest of it. So you have a Kenneth Copeland clip, and this is what.
And this is the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But there was a subset of people within the charismatic community who had prophesied pretty defiantly and pretty clearly about Donald Trump, not just as he was, all rulers are under the sovereignty of God, not just that in the sense that, appointed by God, but in the sense of he had a special, specific, nation-saving divine appointment. Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, like the King David analogy was even stronger than, here we have somebody who's done bad things but can do good things. It was also the anointed, the anointing. And so there was this powerful strain of prophecy throughout parts of American Christianity that said America's in an ending or in irreversible decline, and only this man.
I mean, David French is part of that whole, let me extrapolate fringe and cultish elements that exist, and let me apply that to a mass swath of conservatives. David French was a part of that. And the fact that he claims to understand these things, if you look at the whole Christian nationalism thing and the people that believe that that America is a divinely inspired nation and stuff like that, that really you see a lot of that, in some of those fringe, hyper charismatic camps. But you also see that in Mormonism. Mormonism, in a nutshell, Mormonism is Islam, but in America. Look at the story. You have a prophet, you have an angel, you have a nationalistic interest in a certain area, and you try to reinvent the creation account to apply to heighten a specific geographical region and ethnic group. All these things are, a lot of similarities there. And, certainly as far as like the whole cultish mentality. So, that's what Mormonism is in a nutshell. And that's where you see a lot of this whole, what the caricature of Christian nationalism from the media is. Obviously, Christian nationalist is just someone who's a Christian and someone who has a political orientation towards nationalism instead of globalism. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that, in the famous words of Michael Scott.
Man appointed by God can stop it. And that's a difficult thing to argue against.
Yeah, sure.
Because you're arguing against a prophecy. How do you argue against that prophecy? And so I realized, part of the way through some of those debates, that's what I was really debating. It wasn't a set of policy propositions. It wasn't the 1998 Southern Baptist Convention statement on the importance of character in politicians. Right. I've probably quoted that more than 99.9% of Baptists.
You said 98%.
And,
and then they reaffirmed it word for word in 2018.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. And And so I wasn't actually debating that. What I was debating were two things that were tough to debate. One, which is this firm conviction that a future event, a potential future event, election of Joe Biden, could end the country. How do you disprove that, right?
Right.
And then the other thing that I was debating was a prophecy level conviction that this person, Donald Trump, was appointed by God. Now, that's not the entire reason why evangelicals supported Trump, but there were a lot of evangelicals, particularly who were influenced by charismatic Pentecostal theology, who were in that camp.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that has happened is, and it's not just in one community, where there are these broken friendships of people who David Frum wrote about it in terms of revealed preference, where you say, well, wait a minute, how can you be doing this? We believe X. And then people are saying, yes, but we've always really believed Y. I thought that was the more important thing. And you're starting to say, well, you know, how did we not know that we were this out of step? And why are we in a moment where we can't be out of step without a total breaking of all relationships? I even knew someone who there was almost a wedding potentially that could have been called off because there were people saying, we don't want to be unequally yoked. And what they were talking about was not belief in Christ. It was that they had different views on January 6th and so forth.
Yikes. Yeah.
And I mean, you had a good term for this.
You shouldn't get married to a leftist. That's my dating advice of the day. Do not get married to a leftist. And don't get married to an effeminate male like David French either.
Factional friendships. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, here's what I wonder often. And I find myself asking this almost every day. I mentioned this in the event with Beth. Is this just life and we're just sort of seeing it? Mm-hmm. Has it always been this way? And so that when you look back, I mean, you can look back and see evangelical leaders talking about how the 1970s are the definitive moment, or the 1980s, or what have you. Is this really a unique moment in this way, or are we just sort of seeing what life has always been?
So I think it's a unique moment that is exposing the reality of life in a particularly clear way. Okay, so I think that if you look at 2020,
that's actually a very good question by Russell Moore there, credit where credit is due. The answer is yes, both. Both. So, because we have been saying this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and I remember hearing that in like 2012, and that was probably the least important election of my lifetime because you had Obama, and then you had Mitt Romney, who believed everything that Obama believed. So a very insignificant election, and it's like, okay, we can come back in 2016 with a better field, and then we got Donald Trump, and I wasn't sure of the importance of that election, but that election ended up being very important. And, you know, how important an election is really a hindsight calculation. I'm not sure how important obviously I think the 2020 election was pretty important, but we'll see how really important that is later on. Because, you know, the damage is still being done right now as we have massive supply chain issues that are self-inflicted and have growing intensity in the country, and almost universally hated president.
2020 and 2021, Michelle Goldberg, who writes the New York Times, put it very well in late 2020. She said, in 1 year, we've been through 1974, an impeachment.
Yeah.
We've been through 1968, riots. Mm-hmm. We've been through 1929, a stock market crash. We've been through 1918, a pandemic.
Yeah.
Then you roll into 2021. You went through 1975, a fall of Saigon. You went into another 1974, another impeachment. And then with January 6th, you came closer than we've ever come since 1861 to an 1861. And so all of that has happened at once. And what
these people are such cultists. Like, you are a statist if you want to compare 1961 to January 6th. You are a statist, and you are scum. Like, the ordinary people don't care about that event. Only leftists do. Only statists do.
What's happened is it has put immense pressure on all of us to greater or lesser degrees. And one of the things that I've come to believe in life is we don't really know who we are until we're tested. And that's sort of comprehensive. You know, you don't know if you're physically brave until you have to show some courage. You don't know if you're truthful unless telling the truth you can tell the truth when it hurts you. You don't even know if, you don't know if you're faithful until maybe you've been tempted. Maybe you're sort of like, I was around a guy the other day. He said, yeah, I was pure before marriage, but it was a completely inadvertent purity. And an unintentional purity before marriage.
Yes.
But we don't know who we are until we're tested. And often we don't know why we even have a relationship until it's tested. And I think that one of the things that a lot of people found was that we thought our common unity was in Christ. It turned out it was in politics. And then when that common unity in politics fractured, everything else fell apart. And that's the story for an awful lot of people in this country.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't endorse candidates.
What common unity was there in politics? I don't really get what he's talking about. We had common unity in politics that fractured in, let's say 2016 is when that fractured. Really? What common unity in politics existed that was then removed, and that thus revealed that this was really what united us and not the gospel? Like, what is he talking about?
Right. Interact with whoever is in authority at the moment, but I don't endorse candidates. One of the reasons why I was so alarmed in 2016 is because I didn't think that the lesser of two evils argument would hold.
Right.
And I wish I had been wrong about that. So I was, I spent a lot of time with secular media defending
Russell
my
Moore is a
fellow
lifelong
evangelicals who
Democrat,
saw
by
Trump
the way.
differently than I did, to say most of them aren't saying this is what we want in total. They're saying this is better than that. But the problem is I've seen it happen so many times, and it doesn't just happen on the right, it happens on the left in a lot of ways too, is once this is our guy and in office. So, for instance, I've seen the same people who had bumper stickers, support the president, bomb Iraq, all of that back in the 2002, 2003, 2004 era, and were really interventionist sort of people who now are saying, end these ridiculous forever wars. That not because they say, as we all do with something, I've considered this, and I think that this is not right, or that was my view then. It's as though it never happened.
Yeah.
That's a complete mischaracterization. I think a lot of people are freely admitting that they have changed their minds on certain things. Now, what we're not seeing is people, not enough people are willing to have the conversation that Trump locked the country down. And they're not willing to have that conversation. And that's why I got to red pill you here. And I'll go out of my way to red pill you on that. But Trump locked the country down, and a lot of his supporters won't admit that. They'll admit that, I thought that Iraq was the right thing to do at the time, and now that I see that we got nothing out of it because Bush is a terrible commander-in-chief, that was a bad idea. Because, we didn't find the nukes that we were looking for. We didn't find Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. We found him in Pakistan. And it's funny because if you look, because there's an episode of Scrubs, a TV show that came out during the Bush era, where, the crazy janitors, like, I think we should be looking for Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. Lo and behold, where was Osama bin Laden? Not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, in Pakistan, the country that we give millions of dollars to. So they can have an air force to, counter our ally, India. That people have changed their minds on foreign policy. I don't understand why we're not allowed to change our minds on foreign policy without Trump. And really, it's not Trump doing that. It's Ron Paul that did that. Ron Paul and his non-interventionalism changed the Republican Party, not Donald Trump. Ron Paul. Credit where credit is due.
But we've got different teams, and they're asking different things now.
Well, and you and I both know if Chris Christie hadn't demolished Marco Rubio and the Rubio rise continued, a lot of these exact same people would be saying, oh, well, Reaganism and the optimism and the outlook, that outlook that's who we are. That's who we are. There's some, real interesting polling data that basically says we are deeply influenced by who runs the party, of who's the head of the party, who's the president. If you're on that side, and
I don't think that's true. You can say that's true with Trump. You can make that argument. Trump, like George W. Bush. I don't see that being the case, because as soon as he left office, his influence was killed. George H.W. Bush, same thing. Obviously, Ronald Reagan, when he left office, he wasn't really able to carry the party. Recollecting how he had Alzheimer's. So I don't think this is really true outside of Trump. Like the who's the head of the party? Well, Trump is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, and to be honest, he's kind of clawing for his influence back, because Ron DeSantis has been the opposition leader of the Republican Party, and everywhere else in the country we want our governors to be like Ron DeSantis, and that's dragging Abbott up. That's dragging a few other governors up to step up their game, and it's not Trump doing that. Trump has actually stepped people's game down. He's endorsing these rhinos running for re-election. So I don't get the point. And even a rhino like the guy running in Virginia, the Republican nomination for governor, is trying to invoke Trumpism, and ironically, his opponent is doing such a bad job, because he's saying that Glenn Youngkin is basically Donald Trump, or he's going to Ron DeSantis Virginia, and it's like, that dude I don't even think he has the endorsement of the NRA, which is pretty hard for a Republican not to get, right? He goes to a woke church. He's such a bad candidate, but he's basically being accused of Trump, which is actually elevating his game. So I don't really get the argument. If you want to look at the long, no one was Bush could only carry elections during his tenure, but afterwards he was irrelevant. Trump is relevant, but I don't see him and he is the de facto leader of the party, but he's not exactly driving the thoughts of the people. The base is moving to the right of Trump, and he can't control that. He's riding it. He can try to ride it, but he can't control that.
So you can take an array of issues, and your answer to whether or not you agree with them is going to depend almost entirely on who's advocating for them.
Yeah.
And so that's what
some people have even done this project of saying, do you agree with Barack Obama that? Yeah. Do you agree with Donald Trump that? And they put the exact same statement and get completely opposite answers.
Completely. Yeah. And that's the tribalism at work. I mean, I had always been somebody who I was a civil libertarian. In other words, I protected the rights of everybody, regardless left, right. But when it came to politics, I was a pretty partisan Republican. I was a 2012 GOP delegate for Mitt Romney. I mean, you don't get much more partisan than that. But then I left.
Because he was Mitt Romney. Yeah, exactly. He's a Romney Republican.
The GOP in 2016. And I have to say that I don't ever intend to go back and join a party. I really feel like...
No matter what party.
No matter what party. I really feel like that has been one of the better decisions that I've made, is to shed that partisanship. That doesn't mean I don't vote for somebody on a party or, but to just shed that partisan identity, I feel like it's put me in a better position. It's a more healthy position, I think, in many ways for a citizen, because it takes you out of the role of being a lawyer, which is my side. I'm going to amplify how good we are. I'm going to minimize how bad we are. I'm going to amplify how bad they are and minimize how good they are. And it kind of puts you in the role of a juror.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then you're deciding between competing arguments, and I think it's a much better place. It's a much better place, and I think also Christians should really think hard about how much they want to have that partisan identity.
Yeah. Well, Pastor.
So here's where he's half right and here's where he's dead wrong. So he's half right that we shouldn't have our identity in a political party. I agree with that. Where he's wrong is his application. We should not be weighing the arguments of a Democrat. Democrats are far beyond gone. There's nothing redeemable about that party. And if you're running as a Democrat, you're my enemy because you're basically going along with communism's infiltration of the United States. There's no nice way to put it. That's basically what it is. And, I believe it's a sin to vote for that party because it's that evil. It is that openly anti-God, and it's not even remotely debatable. I've read their platform. It's very bad. And I don't think they're right on any salient issue. No, legalizing marijuana is not a salient issue. So grow up if you believe it is. So with that said, the right application of that is that we should be jurors, right, of Republican candidates, or, if you have a viable area where there's a third party or whatever, we should be jurors to say, hey, thumbs up, thumbs down. And we actually have more leverage if we're willing to sack candidates. Like, I have no problem with Republicans that said, was it Kelly Loeffler or whatever her name is, and Senator Perdue and Senator Loeffler said, no, you guys don't represent us. We're not voting for you on January 8th. I believe that's when the runoff was. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the Republicans that said, or the Christians that, or Republicans, conservatives that said, we're not voting for Martha McSally, the biggest rhino who couldn't even win a Senate race as she tried. And then she lost like 2 Senate races. Like, I have no problem with that. And no conservative should be voting for Susan Collins in Maine, who is pro-abortion. Like, there's no reason to vote for those people. Sack them. Sack them. You can always win the next election. Assuming you don't terraform your state beyond its reach. You can always try to win the next election. So, you got to be willing to have some balls and recognize that elections are temporal and you can sack them. Like, I am determined that unless my guy wins the GOP primary for Maryland governor, I'm not voting Republican unless my guy wins. That's leverage. You have leverage. And if enough of you have that, policy, guess who's going to win these more primaries? Your guys. If you say we're going to vote for the Mitt Romneys, or we're still going to vote for Mitt Romney in the general, which is not, a lot of Republicans did not do that, because if you look at Trump actually gained a lot of voters that McCain and Romney could not get. Trump was able to get those voters to show up. So basically, we have leverage when we actually wield the Republican Party to our advantage. Otherwise, if we go along with whatever the Republican Party wants us to go along with, we got to be the alpha in the relationship. That's what it comes down to. We need to be the alpha in the relationship. We need to determine who the Republican Party nominates, not the Republican Party determining who we vote for. That's it. That's where the leverage is. This is how we win.
I'm having this conversation, as you know, every day.
Yes.
With pastors. And what's interesting to me are pastors who previously were not the people who were going to get up and endorse candidates, and nor were they the kind of people who were going to get up and say prophetically, care for the stranger and whatever. They thought, I'm just going to preach the gospel, and I'm going to avoid all of these things, not because they were cowards, but because they were saying, I want to be able to reach everybody in my community. I don't want to be distracted with these other things. But it doesn't work anymore because
it's
if you just get up and one pastor said he simply prayed for the family of George Floyd, and suddenly he was accused of being a critical race theorist.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And someone else who prayed for 1 Timothy 2, prayed for President Biden, and someone was outraged because he wasn't affirming that the election was stolen. This isn't president. And so there's no way to get around it. And with social media, it's heightening it.
Yeah.
I mean, half the time I will say to people, there's a limit here. There's an end point because nobody can keep going this way. No society without exhaustion. And then half the time I say, maybe this is just going to keep getting worse.
Well, history has proven you can go this way into the point of mass bloodshed. I mean, history has proven that. Now, that doesn't mean that that's inevitable. That doesn't even mean it's probable. But it definitely means it's possible. I mean, if you had told me a year ago, and a year ago, I'm pretty cynical about the state of American politics. 1 year ago this week, I released a book saying "Divided," called "Divided We Fall," where I posited that America could break up. But in September of 2020, if you told me in January of 2021,
is that a bad thing?
A mob of thousands of people, many of them praying Christians, listening to Christian praise music, would storm the United States Capitol to try to overturn the lawful results of the election, driven by the wildest, dumbest conspiracy theories you've ever heard, I would have said, that's nuts.
Really?
Yeah. And not only that, but
are 4 a.m. votes that should not be counted a wild conspiracy theory? Like, no, these weren't. They harvested ballots. It's not a conspiracy theory. That's what they did. And to some degree, a lot of it was legal in states like Georgia, but they harvested ballots. They found the ballots that they needed. In Pennsylvania, it does not take a week to count an election. Yet, and then when Philadelphia was done, then they had Pittsburgh counting more ballots until they could get their guy in. It was completely messed up because it does not take that long. You should be able to count an election in one night. This isn't the World Series where it takes a few nights. There's a better analogy, but you get my point. It was not a dumb, and it's not like American elections have always been clean. 1960 is a clear example. Rutherford B. Hayes, I want to say, was another example. There have been some shady elections in U.S. history. Obviously, you can look at the Democrats trying to steal a 2000 election with the hanging chads nonsense.
if either of us had said in 2016,
Broward
this
County,
is
Florida,
where
by
this
the
could
way.
go.
Right.
The other would have said, you need a vacation. Let's not be scaremongering with ridiculous sorts of scenarios that wouldn't happen.
Oh, one of the things that is very humbling for a person in
A ridiculous scenario is Trump losing Florida, or Trump winning Florida by a large margin and losing Georgia. That's a ridiculous scenario.
my line of work is to go back and read some of the things that you wrote. And I remember in 2017 writing something that was essentially saying, look, I didn't want Trump to win. But, I mean, let's be real. There's a lot of checks and balances here.
Yeah.
And for most of the 4 years, that was right. That was spot on. There were a lot of checks and balances that blocked his worst impulses. But they blocked his worst impulses until they didn't. And the thing that I think that was so discouraging wasn't that Donald Trump was Donald Trump. It was that everybody else. And what was it that at your conversation with Beth?
She said, I'm not surprised that Trump was Trump. I'm surprised that I was surprised that we were us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this goes back to your lesser evil point. Nobody likes to be on team lesser evil.
Yeah, that's true. That's
We're
true.
always
So they're
on
going to
team
convince
lesser
themselves
evil.
that
We're
it's
totally
good.
Yeah.
depraved.
That the
Without
lesser
Christ,
evil
we're
is
totally
actually
depraved.
good. And then once you've crossed that threshold of calling what is evil good, calling what is bad, what is wrong right, then there aren't many limits left for you at that point. And that's where, we came, I had friends from college who, look, he was my 16th choice out of 16.
Yes, I heard that.
Again, David French was a delegate for Mitt Romney, a frickin' pagan. A serial liar, pro-abortion, pro-homosexual marriage. That's who David French was a delegate for. And, of course, pro-Obamacare. Under a different name. There is nothing conservative about Mitt Romney, and that's who David French was a delegate for.
That a lot.
And
Yeah.
going to being like the third bass boat in the boat parade. I mean, that was the progression that people made.
Yeah, as someone said to me, he was my 16th choice out of 17 because who's going to vote for George Pataki? That was his line. Now, you in a newsletter several weeks ago.
Let's cut it off there. I'm worn out, and this is an effeminate fest full of conspiracy theories, but it's a good taste of what goes on. And let me know in the comment section if you want me to do the part 2 and finish this up, because it's a long night, so I don't have time for all this. So let me know what you think about what I think, and like the video and subscribe and stuff like that. Have a blessed day. I'll catch you on the next one.